I was 9 months pregnant when my husband abandoned me in an abandoned parking lot, laughing as he drove off to a luxury resort with his mistress. I stood there, alone, humiliated and in labor, and just when I thought things couldn't get worse, my nightmare became breaking news. I'm Emily Carter, and this is the story of how betrayal nearly broke me, but also how I found the strength to fight back. What would you have done in my situation? Let me know in the comments, because trust me, this story is just getting started. The late afternoon sun cast long, indifferent shadows across the cracked pavement of the deserted parking lot. The air was dry, thick with the scent of scorched asphalt and distant exhaust fumes. I stood there, my body heavy with the weight of 9 months of pregnancy, watching as my husband, Daniel Hayes, the man I had built a life with, laughed before slamming the car door shut. "Take a nice walk," he sneered, his voice sharp, slicing through the silence like a blade. The metallic blue of his luxury car shimmered under the fading sunlight as he revved the engine. My mouth went dry, my heart pounded in my chest, a slow, sinking realization setting in as he accelerated away, the tires screeching against the pavement. I stumbled forward instinctively, as if my sheer willpower alone could stop him, but the car disappeared beyond the highway ramp in seconds, leaving behind only a trail of dust and the bitter echo of his laughter. And then there was silence. The kind of silence that suffocates, that presses against your skin like an invisible force. My hands trembled as I clutched my belly, the dull ache in my lower back intensifying. The baby shifted inside me, pressing down uncomfortably. I sucked in a sharp breath. The fear in my chest quickly turned into something colder, something that burned through my veins like liquid fire. Daniel had planned this. This wasn't a moment of heated rage. This wasn't a lapse in judgment. He had driven us here under the pretense of a peaceful drive, reassuring me that we needed fresh air, that I had been stressing too much, that he just wanted to talk. I had believed him. God, how stupid I had been. I glanced around. The lot stretched for miles, surrounded by chain-link fences and distant, crumbling warehouses. No people, no cars. Just the distant hum of the highway and the occasional gust of wind that carried the scent of decay and gasoline. My phone, useless. Dead battery. Daniel had made sure of that too. I pressed my hands against my belly, trying to steady my breathing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. What now? The first wave hit me like a dull, aching squeeze deep in my abdomen. It wasn't sharp, but it was unmistakable. A contraction. My breath hitched as I gritted my teeth, bending slightly forward. My hands pressed against my belly as if I could somehow hold everything together. Not now, not here. The pain passed, but panic surged in its place. I had read about this, about how stress could trigger early labor. My baby wasn't due for another 2 weeks, but my body didn't care about schedules. My knees threatened to buckle, but I forced myself to stay upright. I had to move. I had to get out of here. I scanned the empty lot again, searching for any sign of life. Nothing. Just endless pavement, graffiti-stained buildings, and an old payphone booth in the distance. My legs felt like lead as I took my first step toward it. Then I heard it. The unmistakable sound of a car engine. Relief hit me like a tidal wave, but it lasted only a second before my stomach twisted with dread. What if Daniel had sent someone? What if he had changed his mind? Not to take me back, but to make sure I never opened my mouth about what he had done. I turned, my heart hammering against my ribcage, but the car wasn't Daniel's. It was a news van. I barely had time to process what was happening before the van screeched to a stop a few feet away. The door swung open, and a woman in a fitted blazer and pristine white sneakers hopped out, a microphone already in her hand, the logo on her jacket, Channel 4 News. I felt my breath catch. Emily Carter? The woman's voice was smooth, rehearsed, polished in the way only seasoned reporters could be. I took a step back. What? How do you know my name? She gestured toward the cameraman, who was already positioning himself, adjusting the focus on me. Someone called in a tip about a woman being left stranded here, said it was a real estate mogul's wife. Your husband is quite well known, isn't he?" I felt sick. Daniel. He had wanted this. This wasn't just about abandoning me. This was about destroying me, about making a spectacle out of my suffering. The reporter tilted her head, her carefully lined eyes scanning me, analyzing, waiting for the perfect soundbite. "How does it feel?" she asked, her voice honeyed with artificial sympathy. "How does it feel to be left out here alone, heavily pregnant, while your husband drives off with another woman?" My throat tightened. The words wouldn't come. I felt hot, nauseous, my body both rigid and shaking. The camera lens glared at me like a single unblinking eye, recording every raw, broken piece of me. I could hear my own breathing, heavy and uneven. I could feel my pulse drumming against my skin, and yet I couldn't move. I was trapped, not just in this moment, but in a nightmare of Daniel's making. The second contraction hit harder. This time, I gasped. My hands clutched at my belly as a sharp, twisting pain spread through me. I staggered, my vision blurring at the edges. "Are you okay?" the reporter asked, but I barely heard her. I was losing control. I had to get out of here. I turned and started walking, ignoring the camera, ignoring the voices calling after me. Every step felt like a battle. My body ached, my mind screamed at me to stop, but I kept going. The headlights of an approaching vehicle cut through the evening dimness, bright and sudden. For a moment, I thought, Daniel came back, but it wasn't him. The tires skidded slightly against the pavement as the car slowed to a stop. A man jumped out, his voice urgent. "Ma'am, are you all right?" I barely had time to process his face, his uniform, paramedic, before my legs finally gave out beneath me. Darkness rushed in like a tide. I didn't fight it. I drifted between consciousness and oblivion, weightless yet crushed beneath an invisible force. My body ached, every nerve frayed and screaming, but it was the cold that jolted me back, an antiseptic chill against my skin, sharp, unnatural. Bright lights overhead blurred into streaks of white as I blinked, disoriented. A voice, steady and low, cut through the haze. "You're safe now." I turned my head slightly, my vision swimming before focusing on the man beside me. He wore a paramedic's uniform, his expression calm but focused. Short dark hair, sharp features softened by concern. "Can you hear me?" I tried to speak, but my throat was dry, my lips cracked. The air smelled sterile, tinged with something metallic. I wasn't in that parking lot anymore. "Yes," I rasped, my own voice foreign to me. He nodded, adjusting an oxygen mask near my face, but not forcing it on me. He was watching me carefully, like he knew I was on the edge of panic, teetering between survival instincts and exhaustion. "Emily, right?" I frowned, trying to recall if I had told him my name. Maybe someone else had. Maybe the reporters. "I'm Ethan Turner," he continued, his tone even, practiced. "You're in an ambulance, you're in labor. We need to get you to a hospital, but you're dehydrated and your vitals are unstable. I need you to focus on breathing, all right?" The word labor barely registered. My body felt foreign, like it didn't belong to me anymore, only to the waves of pressure that rolled through it. "How far?" I managed, my fingers weakly gripping the blanket draped over me. "Close," Ethan assured me. "UCLA Medical Center. Just a few more minutes." Minutes. Time had lost all meaning since Daniel had left me. Daniel. His name burned through my thoughts like acid. The memory of his smirk, the casual cruelty in his voice as he abandoned me, played on a loop in my mind. "Breathe, Emily." Ethan's voice anchored me. I clenched my jaw and forced air into my lungs, gripping the sides of the stretcher as another contraction tore through me. I couldn't fall apart now. I had to survive this for my daughter. The emergency room was chaos. Flashes of movement, the beeping of machines, gloved hands adjusting tubes, repositioning my body, voices barking medical jargon I barely understood. "BP is dropping, elevate her legs. Fetal distress. We need to move now. Emily, can you hear me?" I wanted to respond. I wanted to tell them I was still here, that I wasn't just a body on a table, but the pain swallowed me whole. A familiar voice broke through the storm. "Emily, it's Ethan. You're okay." I turned my head, seeking him out like a lifeline. He stood by my side, his presence steady in a room that spun wildly around me. "You need to push." I had nothing left. Every muscle in my body was raw, every inch of me drained. "I can't," I whispered. "You can." His eyes locked onto mine, unwavering. "One more time. I promise you're almost there." Somewhere deep inside, I found it. The last piece of strength I didn't know I had. I gritted my teeth and pushed. A sharp cry pierced the air. Everything stopped. The hands moving over me, the frantic voices, the crushing weight of agony, a sound so small, yet it filled the entire room. I gasped, my vision blurred with tears, searching desperately as a nurse wrapped a tiny, writhing form in a blanket. The weight of her settled against my chest, impossibly light. My daughter. She was here. She was real. I let out a strangled sob, pressing my lips against her damp forehead, inhaling the scent of newborn skin, warm and untouched by the cruelty of the world. Ethan stood back, his expression unreadable. But in his eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen in so long. Kindness without expectation. For the first time since Daniel drove away, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't alone. The hospital room was silent except for the rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor and the occasional murmur of voices in the hallway. The chaos had settled, replaced by an eerie stillness that left me alone with my thoughts. My daughter lay sleeping in the bassinet beside me, her tiny chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. I reached out, tracing a single finger along her delicate cheek. "It's just us now." The weight of those words settled in my chest, equal parts terrifying and liberating. A knock at the door made me flinch. Ethan. His uniform was rumpled, the exhaustion on his face unmistakable. But he still managed a small smile. "How are you holding up?" "I don't know yet," I admitted. He hesitated, then stepped inside, closer but not intruding. "You did good, Emily. She's beautiful." I swallowed hard, nodding. Silence stretched between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was understanding. "The news is everywhere," he said after a moment, his voice careful. I closed my eyes. I already knew what he meant. Daniel, the reporters. The betrayal turned into spectacle. I had just brought a child into the world, and yet the world I was returning to had already branded me as a scandal. Ethan hesitated before speaking again. "You don't have to face this alone." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to trust that kindness existed without ulterior motives. But I had trusted before, and look where that had left me. I turned away, focusing on the steady breathing of my daughter. "Thank you, Ethan." My voice was quiet, final, a polite dismissal. He nodded, reading the unspoken words between us. "Get some rest, Emily." I listened to his footsteps retreat down the hall, the door clicking shut behind him. For the first time, I was safe. But safe didn't mean unbroken. As I stared at my daughter, a single thought anchored itself in my mind. I had survived Daniel. I had survived betrayal, labor, and public humiliation. Now I had to survive whatever came next. Suddenly, I was famous. Not the kind of fame that came with admiration or respect, the kind that turned my life into a spectacle. My name trended on social media. Talk show hosts debated whether I was a victim or an opportunist. Strangers speculated about my marriage, my character, my worth. The pregnant woman publicly betrayed by her husband on live television. That was my new identity. I sat on the edge of my small couch, my newborn daughter cradled in my arms, staring at my phone screen as it lit up with another notification. A news anchor's voice echoed from the television in the background. Daniel Hayes, once a celebrated real estate mogul, now finds himself in the midst of a public scandal after abandoning his heavily pregnant wife. Sources close to the couple suggest... I grabbed the remote and shut it off. The silence in my apartment was suffocating. My daughter stirred against me, her tiny fist curling near her cheek. The warmth of her body was the only thing anchoring me, keeping me from unraveling completely. I wasn't just a woman recovering from childbirth. I wasn't just a betrayed wife. I was the unwilling face of a viral controversy, and I had no idea how to survive it. I had been home from the hospital for 3 days. 3 days of reporters parked outside my building, of neighbors whispering in the hallways, of my phone vibrating with calls and messages I didn't want to answer. 3 days of figuring out how to exist in a world that suddenly had opinions about my life. I hadn't seen Ethan since the night he walked me to my hospital room. He had been the only steady presence in the chaos, but I had pushed him away, unwilling to let myself trust too easily again. That didn't stop him from checking in. Need anything? His latest text sat unread on my screen. I hadn't answered the others, but for some reason today I typed back, "Just sleep." A response came almost immediately. "Then sleep. I'll bring coffee later." I stared at the message, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I should tell him no. I didn't need anyone, but the exhaustion in my bones said otherwise. The knock on my door was firm but not intrusive. I pulled it open to find Ethan standing there, holding a takeout tray with 2 coffees and a brown paper bag. He was in civilian clothes this time, jeans and a plain gray t-shirt, a stark contrast to the paramedic uniform that had once made him feel like my lifeline. "You answered your phone," he said lightly, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. I shut the door behind him. "I regret it already," he smirked, setting the coffee down on the kitchen counter. "You need to eat. You look like you haven't been sleeping." I let out a dry laugh. "That's because I haven't." He nodded as if he understood, and maybe he did. He pulled out a wrapped sandwich from the bag and handed it to me without asking if I wanted it. I took it. For a moment, there was just the sound of paper crinkling as I unwrapped my food. Ethan didn't push me to talk. He just sat on the couch, sipping his coffee, watching my daughter sleep in the bassinet nearby. "She looks like you," he said after a while. I swallowed a bite, my throat tight. "I hope so." He glanced at me, his expression unreadable. "Daniel reached out yet?" I exhaled sharply. "Not yet, but he will." It wasn't a guess, it was a certainty, and I was right. The call came that night. I had just put my daughter down when my phone vibrated against the nightstand. Daniel. I stared at the screen, my chest tightening. I could ignore it. I should ignore it, but I didn't. I swiped to answer, pressing the phone to my ear without speaking. His voice was sharp, dripping with anger. "Are you happy now?" A bitter laugh rose in my throat. "Excuse me?" "You made me a joke, Emily. You let them humiliate me." I clenched my jaw. "I didn't do anything, Daniel. You did. You could have shut it down, gone on TV, told them it wasn't what it looked like. Instead, you're just sitting there, letting them destroy me." I pressed my fingers to my temple, trying to steady my breathing. "You left me. You left me, Daniel. You don't get to call me now and make this my fault." There was a pause, the kind that felt dangerous. Then his voice lowered, venomous. "You think this is over? You think I'm just going to sit back and let you take everything from me?" A chill ran down my spine. "I don't want anything from you." "That's good," he said, his tone eerily calm now, "because you're not getting anything." The line went dead. I stood there, gripping my phone, trying to stop the shaking in my hands. I had been waiting for this. I had known Daniel wouldn't disappear quietly, but hearing the threat in his voice made one thing clear. He wasn't done with me yet. I sat on the couch, my head in my hands. My daughter's soft breathing filled the space between my thoughts, grounding me. Ethan's voice echoed in my mind. "You don't have to face this alone." I wasn't sure if that was true, but I was starting to think I might have to try. A formal invitation arrived the next morning, a high-profile charity gala, a room full of wealthy elites, a perfect setting for public appearances, for men like Daniel to control the narrative. I knew exactly why I had been invited, and I knew exactly who would be there. I ran my fingers over the heavy cardstock, my decision already made. Daniel wanted to talk? Then let's talk. The moment I stepped into the ballroom, I felt the weight of every gaze snapping toward me. The air inside was thick with artificial charm, the scent of expensive perfume and champagne barely masking the undercurrent of whispers. I had expected the stares, the murmurs, the not-so-subtle glances from guests pretending not to recognize me while their eyes lingered a second too long. I was the woman they had seen on the news, the one whose husband had abandoned her in a parking lot, pregnant and alone. And now, here I was, standing tall in a deep emerald gown, my hair swept back, my makeup flawless, a deliberate contrast to the image they had of me, broken and humiliated. I scanned the room, my pulse steady until it wasn't Daniel. He stood near the bar, whiskey in hand, his tailored suit impeccable as always, but the confidence he once carried, the effortless arrogance, was gone. His eyes darted toward me, and for the first time in years, I saw something I never thought I would witness in him. Panic. Good. Madison was beside him, her usual air of superiority tinged with unease. She hadn't expected me to show up. Neither of them had. I felt a presence beside me and turned to see Ethan. He wasn't in uniform tonight, but even in a simple black suit, he carried the same quiet authority. "You sure about this?" he asked, voice low. "I have to be." He nodded, stepping slightly behind me, not as a shield, but as silent reassurance. I squared my shoulders and moved forward. Let the games begin. Daniel made the first move. Of course he did. I was halfway through a glass of champagne, ignoring the conversations buzzing around me, when I heard his voice behind me. "Emily." I turned, meeting his gaze with practiced indifference. "Daniel." For a brief moment, I saw hesitation flicker across his face. He wasn't used to this version of me, the one who no longer recoiled under his scrutiny. "You look, well..." His tone was carefully measured, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. I smiled, matching his false pleasantry. "And you look concerned." His jaw tightened. He hated when he wasn't in control. "Can we talk?" he asked, softer now, leaning in slightly. "We're talking." I could feel the attention on us. People pretending to be engaged in their own conversations while their ears strained to catch every word. Daniel sighed, as if he were the wounded party. "You didn't have to let things get this far, Emily." I blinked. "You mean your actions? Leaving your pregnant wife in a parking lot? Mocking her? Publicly humiliating her?" His lips pressed together, but he recovered quickly. "I never meant for it to happen like that." I laughed. "Oh? How exactly did you mean for it to happen?" The tension between us crackled, drawing more eyes. Daniel took a slow sip of his whiskey, shifting tactics. "You know, this media frenzy hasn't been easy for either of us. Maybe it's time we both moved forward, stopped feeding into the drama." I tilted my head. "Let me get this straight. You create the scandal. You abandon me. You let the world tear me apart. And now, because you're tired of the consequences, I should just let it go." His smile faltered. I leaned in slightly, just enough for only him to hear. "You lost control of the narrative, Daniel. And that terrifies you, doesn't it?" He inhaled sharply, his fingers tightening around his glass, and then he played his final card. "I never stopped loving you." A collective hush fell over the guests closest to us. It was a performance, one crafted perfectly for an audience. The grieving husband, regretful and seeking redemption. Once I would have crumbled. Now I exhaled slowly, my voice even. "You don't get to rewrite history, Daniel. You don't get to turn this into a love story when it was a crime scene." A murmur rippled through the onlookers. Daniel opened his mouth, but I didn't give him the chance. "I don't need your apologies. I don't need your closure. I don't need you." For the first time, he looked truly afraid, because he knew, so did everyone else in that room, he had already lost. I turned away, lifting my champagne glass in silent victory as I walked past him, and then I saw Madison. She had been watching, her expression unreadable. But something in her posture had changed. The confidence she once flaunted in public was cracking, revealing something raw beneath the surface. For the first time, I wondered if Daniel's world wasn't just falling apart for me, but I didn't care enough to find out. The night was a blur after that. Conversations, polite smiles, shaking hands with people who suddenly wanted to be on my side. Ethan appeared beside me again near the end of the night, his presence steady. "You handled that well." "Better than expected." He chuckled, taking a sip from his glass. "I think you scared him." I turned to face him fully. "I hope so." He studied me for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, softly, he said, "You're different than the woman I met that night." I looked away. I had to be. And I had. But just as I let myself breathe, just as I allowed myself to believe that maybe I had finally won, a hand brushed against my arm. I turned, expecting another guest. But it wasn't. It was a man in a dark suit, his face unfamiliar. "Miss Carter," he said smoothly, his voice polished. "Mr. Hayes's legal team will be in touch. He's filing for custody." The room around me seemed to tilt. Of course. Daniel wasn't done. He never would be. I clenched my jaw, forcing the words out. "Tell him I'll see him in court." The man nodded and disappeared into the crowd. Ethan's gaze was already on me. "Emily?" I let out a slow breath, steadying myself. I guess this isn't over yet. The morning after the gala, the headlines screamed my name. Public betrayal, real estate tycoon exposed. Daniel Hayes' wife confronts him in stunning gala showdown. Humiliated husband now fighting for custody. Everywhere I turned, my private suffering had been repackaged into entertainment. I scrolled through social media, past thousands of comments dissecting every word I had said, every glance I had thrown Daniel's way. Some people called me brave, others called me an opportunist, and some, his supporters, called me worse. "She's just milking this for attention." How do we know she didn't plan this all along? Daniel made one mistake and now she's trying to ruin his life. The words shouldn't have mattered, but they did. I had fought so hard to take control of my story, and yet it still felt like it didn't belong to me. A sharp knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. Ethan. I let out a breath before opening the door, already knowing what he was going to say. "You need to stop reading that garbage," he said the moment he saw my face. I know. But I didn't stop. He stepped inside, scanning the stack of newspapers on my kitchen counter. "You shouldn't be dealing with this alone." "I'm not alone," I said, glancing toward the bassinet where my daughter slept. His gaze softened, but he didn't argue. Instead, he pulled out his phone and placed it on the counter. "Daniel's not done." I stiffened. What now? Ethan tapped the screen, and a video began playing. Daniel sat in a high-backed chair in what looked like his penthouse, dressed in a carefully tailored navy suit, his expression a perfect mix of regret and self-righteousness. Across from him, a reporter nodded sympathetically. "I never wanted this to become public," Daniel said smoothly. "I've tried to protect Emily's privacy, but unfortunately, she's chosen to handle this in the most public way possible." I clenched my fists. The woman I married was loving, kind, but after the pregnancy, she changed. She became irrational, paranoid. I was concerned for her well-being, but every time I tried to help, she pushed me away. The reporter leaned in. "So you're saying she's not in a stable state of mind?" "I'm saying that postpartum emotions are complicated, and I just want what's best for my daughter." My stomach turned. Daniel was twisting reality, weaponizing my trauma, painting himself as the concerned husband while subtly planting doubts about my ability to be a mother. I slammed the phone down. "He's trying to make me look unstable." Ethan folded his arms. "And unfortunately, some people will believe him, unless you fight back." I ran a hand through my hair, the weight of it all pressing down on me. "What do you want me to do? Go on TV and defend myself? That'll just make me look more desperate." "Not if you tell the truth," Ethan said simply. "Not just about him, but about what this has done to you. Take control before he does." I hesitated. I had spent so long trying to shut out the noise, to keep my pain private, But maybe that wasn't an option anymore. Maybe the only way to end this was to finally speak. The studio lights were blinding. I sat on the interview couch, my hands clasped in my lap, my heartbeat thundering in my ears. The host, a well-known journalist with a reputation for hard-hitting interviews, smiled at me reassuringly. "Emily, first of all, thank you for being here. I know this must be difficult." "It is," I admitted, "but I also think it's important. Let's start with the obvious question. Why now? Why speak out publicly?" I inhaled deeply, because for too long, my story has been told by everyone except me. And if I stay silent, people like Daniel will keep twisting the truth. The host nodded. "Your husband has suggested that you're struggling emotionally, that your reaction to his actions has been excessive. What do you say to that?" A bitter laugh escaped me. "I say it's interesting how the people who hurt us the most are always the ones who question why we're bleeding." There was a beat of silence. I turned to the camera, my voice unwavering. "I'm not unstable. I'm not dangerous. I'm a woman who was abandoned in her most vulnerable moment and then forced to watch as the man who did it tried to rewrite history. I refuse to let him." The host let my words hang in the air before speaking again. "And what about your daughter? Daniel has said he wants to be involved in her life. Are you open to that?" I swallowed hard, the ache in my chest deep. "I want my daughter to have love and stability. What I won't allow is for her to grow up thinking that manipulation is love, that cruelty is something she has to tolerate." The host leaned forward slightly. "So you believe Daniel is unfit to be in her life?" "I believe he made his choice when he left us." The silence that followed was deafening. The interview ended soon after, but the battle was far from over. The response was immediate. Clips from the interview spread across every platform, my words dissected by experts, debated by strangers. But for the first time, public opinion shifted in my favor. People started calling out Daniel's tactics, questioning his intentions. Madison, ever the opportunist, issued a vague statement distancing herself from the drama. Daniel, however, was quiet. Too quiet. That night, I sat on my couch, my daughter sleeping peacefully in my arms. Ethan sat across from me, watching the news scroll across the screen. "You did good," he said after a while. I let out a breath. "It doesn't feel over." And I was right. Because the next morning, I received an official notice from Daniel's lawyers. He was suing for full custody. I stared at the papers, my hands steady even as my heart pounded. Ethan watched me carefully. "What do you want to do?" I exhaled slowly, lifting my chin. "We fight." The envelope sat on my doorstep like a loaded gun. I stared at it for a long moment before finally bending down to pick it up. My hands were steady, but my stomach churned as I tore the paper open. Superior Court of California. Petition for full custody. The words blurred in front of me, but their meaning was crystal clear. Daniel wasn't finished. He had tried to destroy me in the court of public opinion. That had failed. Now he was coming for the only thing that mattered, my daughter. I took a deep breath, clutching the papers in my fist as I stepped inside, locking the door behind me. Let him try. The Los Angeles family court was cold, clinical. Nothing like the dramatic courtrooms in movies. The walls were beige, the wooden benches stiff, the fluorescent lights casting everything in a sickly glow. Yet despite its lack of grandeur, the tension in the room was suffocating. I sat at my table, my lawyer beside me, my heart pounding. Across the room, Daniel was the picture of manufactured calm. His navy blue suit was flawless, his expression carefully neutral. But his eyes burned with quiet rage. He thought he could still control this. Control me. The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes and an unreadable face, settled into her seat. She glanced at the stack of files before her and sighed. "Let's proceed." Daniel's attorney was the first to speak. A slick, well-groomed man who exuded the kind of confidence only money could buy. Your Honor, my client is deeply concerned about the well-being of his daughter. Ms. Carter, while undoubtedly a loving mother, has demonstrated erratic behavior since her highly publicized separation. She has no stable income, no strong family support, and has been openly hostile toward Mr. Hayes' attempts to co-parent. I gritted my teeth. Daniel sat back, hands folded, playing the role of the reasonable parent, the victim of my supposed instability. My attorney rose, her voice firm. Your Honor, my client has been the primary caretaker of her daughter since birth. She has demonstrated nothing but resilience and responsibility, despite being abandoned in the final weeks of her pregnancy. Mr. Hayes, on the other hand, has a documented history of emotional manipulation and public dishonesty. Daniel's jaw tightened. Good. I stole a glance at Ethan, sitting quietly in the back of the courtroom. His presence alone was steadying. He had offered to testify, but I knew how much he hated being in the public eye. So I had told him he didn't have to. But something in his expression told me that might be changing. Daniel's team called their first witness, one of his former business associates, a man who painted Daniel as a dedicated father-to-be who'd been blindsided by my erratic behavior. It was the narrative Daniel had built carefully, that I had changed, that I was the unstable one. But then came my witnesses. One by one, people from Daniel's past stepped forward. A former employee who had seen his temper behind closed doors, an ex-girlfriend who had once been charmed, then discarded, much like me, a close friend, former friend, who admitted that Daniel had laughed about the night he left me in that parking lot, saying she needed to be taught a lesson. The courtroom murmured. The judge frowned. Daniel's mask was slipping. And then Ethan stood up. I sucked in a breath as he approached the witness stand. Daniel's attorney tried to object, but the judge waved him off. State your name for the record, the clerk instructed. Ethan Turner. And your relationship to Ms. Carter? Ethan glanced at me before turning back. I was the paramedic who found her that night, the night Daniel left her. The room went silent. Daniel stiffened. The judge folded her hands. Go on. Ethan's voice was steady, calm, but beneath it I could hear the anger he was holding back. When I arrived, Emily was in labor, alone, weak. She had been left in an abandoned lot with no phone, no way to call for help. If someone hadn't reported seeing her on the news, she might not have made it to the hospital in time. I closed my eyes for a brief moment. And in your professional opinion, my attorney pressed, was she in a fit state to care for herself, let alone a child at that time? No, Ethan said without hesitation, because Daniel Hayes made sure of that. Daniel's attorney shot up. Objection! Speculation! Overruled, the judge said, her voice clipped. Daniel was fuming now, his perfect composure cracking like glass. That's not true, he spat, standing suddenly. The judge shot him a look that could have frozen fire. Sit down, Mr. Hayes. Daniel slowly lowered himself back into his seat, but the damage was done. The courtroom had just witnessed the first real break in his facade, and the judge had noticed. The deliberation didn't take long. In the matter of custody of minor child Ava Carter, the judge began, her voice firm, the court finds that primary custody shall remain with Ms. Carter, with Mr. Hayes granted supervised visitation as deemed appropriate. Supervised. Not shared, not equal. Daniel had lost. The gavel struck. It was over. I gathered my things, my heart still racing even as relief flooded through me. Ethan touched my arm briefly, a silent, "You did it." Daniel, however, wasn't finished. As I stepped into the hallway, he was already there, waiting. His tie was loosened, his face pale with fury. "Enjoy this while it lasts, Emily," he murmured, his voice low, venomous. I held his gaze, refusing to look away. "I will," I said simply. A muscle in his jaw ticked, and then just as he turned, I heard it. Low, whispered words exchanged between him and his lawyer. "We'll do it another way." A chill ran through me. He wasn't done. And now I had to prepare for whatever was coming next. The phone rang at midnight. At first, I thought I was dreaming. The rhythmic beeping of the baby monitor, the soft rustling of the trees outside. It all felt too normal, too undisturbed. But the second ring pulled me fully awake. I reached for my phone, my heart hammering against my ribs. The number was blocked. Somewhere deep inside, I already knew. I hesitated before answering, pressing the phone to my ear with a trembling hand. "You took everything from me." My breath caught in my throat. Daniel's voice was low, venomous, almost unrecognizable. "Now it's my turn." I shot up from the bed, my pulse pounding. My gaze flew to the bassinet beside me, where my daughter lay sleeping, blissfully unaware of the storm about to crash into our lives. "What do you want, Daniel?" I whispered, gripping the phone so tightly my fingers ached. "What's mine?" I heard something in the background, a car engine, the faint hum of tires on pavement. My stomach twisted. "Daniel, if you come near my house, I swear—" "You'll what, Emily?" he interrupted mockingly. "Call the police? File another report? You think they'll always be there to save you?" I swallowed hard. My hands were shaking, but my mind was already racing, calculating. The doors were locked, the alarm was set. I had taken every precaution since the custody hearing, but I also knew Daniel, and if he was calling me, it meant he was already close. I moved toward the window, peeking through the blinds. My quiet suburban street was still, the glow of streetlights casting long shadows across the pavement. Then movement. A dark figure near my driveway. My lungs seized. "You don't get to do this," I said, forcing steel into my voice. "You lost. Accept it." Daniel let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, Emily, I never lose." The call went dead. And then the front doorknob rattled. Adrenaline surged through me. I turned, moving quickly to the bassinet. My daughter stirred at the sudden movement, letting out a soft whimper. "Shh, baby, it's okay," I whispered, scooping her up, pressing her small body against mine. "Think, Emily, I couldn't stay here, but I couldn't run blindly into the night either." The pounding on the door grew louder. "Open up, Emily!" No time. I moved toward the kitchen, my mind locking onto one thing, my phone. My hands fumbled as I dialed. The call rang once, twice. "Ethan." "Emily?" His voice sharpened immediately. "What's wrong?" "He's here." Silence. Then, "I'm on my way. Stay inside. Lock yourself in a room. Do not engage." A loud crash echoed from the front of the house. Glass shattering. Daniel was inside. I ran. I barely made it to the nursery before I heard his footsteps, heavy, unhurried. "You think you can hide from me?" My breath came in shallow bursts as I pressed my back against the door. My daughter still clutched tightly against my chest. The handle twisted. "Open the door, Emily." I squeezed my eyes shut, holding my baby closer. "I just want to see my daughter," he said, his voice almost gentle now. "You owe me that much, don't you?" I didn't answer. The silence stretched. Then, bang. A force slammed against the door, rattling it on its hinges. "Daniel, stop!" I shouted, my voice raw. "This is your fault!" he roared. "You turned everyone against me. You ruined my life." I bit my lip hard enough to taste blood. "You did that to yourself." Another slam. A splintering crack. The door wouldn't hold much longer. Where was Ethan? I scanned the room, searching for anything I could use. My eyes landed on the heavy baby monitor on the dresser. Another crash. The door gave an inch. I tightened my grip on the monitor, adjusting my hold on my daughter. If he got through, I'd have to fight. One more slam, and then a deafening thud. Daniel let out a grunt of pain, footsteps, a struggle, and then Ethan's voice. "Stay down!" I gasped, my knees buckling with relief. Slowly, I opened the door. Daniel was on the ground, one arm twisted behind his back. Ethan kneeled over him, his expression controlled but dangerous. "You should have stayed gone, Hayes," he muttered. Daniel struggled, his face twisted in fury. "She's mine, my daughter." "No, Daniel." My voice was steady, even. "She's not." The flashing red and blue lights of a patrol car filled the windows. Sirens howled. Daniel thrashed once more before the officers yanked him up, shoving his arms behind his back. "You're making a mistake, Emily," he shouted as they dragged him outside. "This isn't over." I watched as the officers forced him into the back of the car, his shouts muffled behind the thick glass. And just like that, he was gone. The house was eerily quiet now, the chaos replaced by an empty stillness. I sank onto the couch, my body trembling. My daughter nestled against me, oblivious to what had just happened. Ethan sat beside me, silent for a long moment. "He won't stop," I whispered. "No," Ethan agreed. "But now, the law is watching him. He won't get near you again." I closed my eyes, exhaustion pulling at me. For the first time in months, I felt safe. Not fully, because wounds like this didn't heal overnight, but enough. I turned to Ethan, meeting his steady gaze. "Thank you," I said softly. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to, because we both knew this wasn't just about tonight. This was about what came next. The morning air smelled like possibility. I stood on the porch of our new home, the California sunshine warming my skin, the gentle rustling of trees, whispering promises of a future I was finally ready to embrace. For the first time in months, maybe even years, I felt free. No fear, no lingering dread, no waiting for the next storm, just peace. The small suburban house wasn't extravagant, but it was ours. A modest 2-bedroom rental on a quiet street, far removed from the shadows of my past. The paint was fresh, the garden simple, and the space just enough for me and my daughter to start over. And we had. I looked down at her, my little girl, rocking gently in her stroller, babbling softly to herself as she reached for the sunlight filtering through the trees. She was growing stronger every day, laughing more, sleeping more, filling every corner of my life with a warmth I never thought I'd feel again. And then there was Ethan. He was inside, unpacking boxes, moving through this new life with me as if he had always been meant to be here. I hadn't planned for him, I hadn't expected him, but life had a way of bringing the right people at the right time. And maybe, just maybe, I was finally ready to accept that. The days since Daniel's arrest had been a blur of court proceedings and legal finalities. The custody battle was over, officially. The judge had ruled in my favor without hesitation. Daniel's break-in, his threats, his reckless behavior had cemented his fate. Mr. Hayes will have no legal right to unsupervised visitation. Any future requests must be evaluated under strict psychological review. Translation: he was done. The last time I saw him was in the courtroom, his hands cuffed, his face pale with fury, as the judge read the ruling. He hadn't looked at me, he hadn't spoken. He knew it was over. Daniel Hayes was now just another disgraced man whose own arrogance had led to his downfall. And I had won. Not just in court, but in life. Ethan found me later that afternoon, standing in the doorway of my daughter's nursery, watching her sleep. "You're doing it again," he said softly. "Doing what?" I asked without looking at him. "Standing there like you're waiting for something bad to happen." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "It's hard to believe it's really over." "It is." I turned to face him, studying the man who had been there through it all, the man who had pulled me out of the darkness when I had no reason to believe in the light. "I don't know how to do this," I admitted. "Do what?" "Trust that this isn't temporary, that this peace, this life, isn't something that can be taken away again." Ethan exhaled, stepping closer. He wasn't a man of grand gestures or poetic words. He never pushed, never asked for more than I could give, but in this moment he was steady, just like he had always been. "You've spent so long surviving, Emily. Maybe it's time to start living." My throat tightened. I don't know if I remember how. He reached for my hand, threading his fingers through mine. "Then let's figure it out together." That night, I sat outside on the porch, a blanket wrapped around my shoulders as I watched the stars. Ethan sat beside me, the space between us smaller than it used to be, but still enough. I used to think love was supposed to be dramatic, I murmured, that it had to be big and consuming, that if it didn't hurt, it wasn't real. He was quiet for a moment. And now? I took a slow breath. Now I think love should feel like this. Like what? Like peace. He reached over, tucking a loose strand of hair behind my ear. You deserve peace, Emily. For the first time, I believed him. The next morning, I woke up to my daughter's laughter filling the house. She was sitting up in her crib, reaching toward the sunlight streaming through the window. I lifted her into my arms, pressing a kiss to her soft curls. It's a new day, baby girl. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of it. I stepped into the kitchen, where Ethan was already making coffee, his presence so natural, so right. He looked up, a knowing smile on his lips. Ready? He asked. I glanced around, the sunlight, the warmth, the feeling of something new settling into place. Yeah, I said, smiling back. I think I am. Because this wasn't just an ending. This was a beginning. Life has a way of testing us in ways we never expect. There was a time when I believed love meant sacrifice, that endurance was a virtue even when it came at the cost of my own happiness. But I've learned something. Real love doesn't leave you stranded in the dark. Real love doesn't humiliate you. It doesn't break you down and call it passion. It doesn't make you feel small so someone else can feel powerful. I know I'm not the only one who has had to rebuild from nothing. Maybe you've been betrayed by someone you trusted. Maybe you've faced moments where you wondered if you were strong enough to stand back up. Let me tell you this, you are. You are more resilient than you think. You are capable of starting over. And most importantly, you deserve peace, happiness, and love that doesn't ask you to lose yourself to keep it. This story isn't just about me. It's about all of us. It's about knowing when to walk away. It's about reclaiming your worth. And it's about choosing to move forward, even when the past tries to hold you back. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to rebuild from the ground up? What gave you the strength to keep going? If this story touched your heart, let me know by commenting number 1 below, or tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you didn't connect with it, I want to know why. Every perspective matters. And don't forget, if you found value in this, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next story. Because life is full of lessons, and together we're here to share them.